introduce Akala, first speaker. And
are we online here?
I'm not sure, huh? I can ask.
If we can be, I'll start. If we can
and then
be,
I'll find
there's
out.
two things I'd like to share.
Okay, cool, man. If it's a YouTube clip, it'll take about 3 days.
Pardon? Oh, will it? Okay, well, it is a YouTube clip. It won't take about 3 days. Never mind. Oh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody feeling this afternoon? Yes. Cool. Kind of with all the discussions we've done out here so far, been really informal. If a question comes up as I'm speaking, feel free to put up your hand and get involved and ask a question. It's really interactive. It's as much about me learning from you guys and getting your thoughts, feelings, and opinions rather than me just sitting here and talking at you. It's not a lecture. It's a discussion. And really, the discussion of today is about the power of the word. If I were to say to people, just out of curiosity, word or the word, what are the first things people think of? What's up? What?
Bible.
The Bible?
Some type of truth.
Some type of truth?
Well, I see the word. I see that word.
But if I say to you, the word, noun, rather than adjective, rather than a phrase, if I say to you the noun, the word, what are the first, what does that bring into
Literature.
The gospel.
literature?
Yeah.
Gospels?
God.
Yeah, a lot of people think of religious sentiment, and it is a religious sentiment, not just in Christianity, but in many of the ancient religions and many of the beliefs throughout the world, that the word is what came first. And obviously by the word, I don't presume they literally meant human beings or the universe started talking, but this belief that the word, all words are a metaphor and embody sort of something bigger than what is being expressed in the mere word. Of course, the word water is not the word water. Water is the title that people from the UK have put on the word water, but they have so much power to shape our beliefs, shape our understanding, words and language in a culture. You know, and I think hip-hop and spoken word is somewhere where that is particularly prevalent. You know, there's been a lot of stick given to hip-hop, particularly for some of the language that is used, for some of the words that are used, without really a larger look at the structure, should we say, of the music industry and who's in charge of the images and words and ideas that we see, and why particular words, thoughts and feelings are expressed quite regularly and are absolutely okay, but certain others are not. Particularly, I'm actually writing an article at the moment about international hip-hop and looking at some of the negative imagery in hip-hop music, particularly the violent imagery, that is overwhelmingly comes from young black males and is quite viscerally and deliberately directed at other young black males. That's made quite clear. It's not directed at the wider world. The words that are used make the intent of the spoken violence very clear. And society seems to find that absolutely perfectly okay, while still hailing that to be the cause of the violence from which these words were born. You know, NWA, the first ever acknowledged gangster rap group, right? They came out of violence in Compton. They didn't produce the violence. The violence preceded their very career, and they were speaking of the violence in that community. Yet this rap music is hailed as the cause of the violence. The word is hailed as being so powerful that it causes the violence, rather than just being a reaction to it. And it's this sort of interaction. I would accept that certainly if particular environments, social conditions, etc. already pre-exist, then we are very susceptible to the word. It can push us over the edge, but I wouldn't say it causes. I'd say it helps us to waver. And one thing I always say to young people, and I found really profound when I'm working with young boys in London, where, particularly in the inner city, this kind of, quite frankly, you know, anti-black hip-hop music has become so common we don't even question it. It's become so normal, and I say to young people, okay, put it this way. My mother's white, my father is black, right? My mother's white Scottish, my father's black Jamaican. If I were to refer to the other side of my culture, the Scottish side, with such visceral, racialized wording, right, and display intent to be so violent towards that side of my culture, do you think I'd get a record deal? Do you think I'd be on the radio? Do you think I'd be an international superstar selling millions of records? Like some people that are so disrespectful to that particular side are. And young boys are like, I've never really thought about that. Every time I've said that, that's never even occurred to me. Like, the fact that if you did it, right, and you're of mixed heritage, and if you did it in the other direction, because of the power of word. Not that people genuinely believe if a rapper did that, everyone would just start going out and trying to kill Scottish people. It's more that the power of the word is so strong, and we accept particular words from particular people, and particular other words from particular other people. The powerless, whatever colour they may be, in whatever society they are allowed to engage in mutual self-defeat through word. What they're not supposed to do is aim their words at their betters, at those above them, at those that, and that's as true in class dynamics as it is in racial dynamics. Young working class Britain is not supposed to aim its anger and its frustrations, even if they're in word form, at their betters in Britain, because the word is so powerful. And when they do, or when people do, your John Lennons, your Bob Marleys, your Bob Dylans, your Jimi Hendrixes. I mean, these are all people who it's well known and it's common knowledge now have had legal fires on them, not because they were criminals, but because their words were considered so powerful and such a potential problem that it was considered intelligent for law enforcement to follow these men, to monitor these men, to see what their activities were. And in Bob Marley's case, of course, there was the attempted assassination, all through the power of the word. Bob Marley wasn't saying, I want to go around and kill anyone. Actually, his word was promoting peace. His word was promoting love. And in fact, in the politics of the Caribbean at the time, in international politics, peace wasn't clearly what was desired. So Bob Marley, for promoting peace, was shot in the heart. He then fled to England, for those who don't know the story, and he made the album Exodus. And this is the power of the word. They can either set us free or they can imprison us. And I see every day, I work with young people all over the world, but in the UK particularly, because that's where I spend most of my time, I'm seeing more and more and more the use of particular words and particular phraseology. And even the idea that to have a limited vocabulary is some sort of, sign of being from the hood, imprisoning young people. Us buying into the very classist idea that as young working class people, we're not supposed to be excellent with words. That's for those people. That's for the Shakespeares as well. Ironically, Shakespeare himself didn't go to university. And part of the whole debate in Britain about did Shakespeare or did he not write his own work. Just before I came to the UK, there was a documentary about did Shakespeare really write his own work. That debate of was Shakespeare really this excellent with his wording only exists because he didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge and Eton, and he wasn't the Duke of blah, blah, blah. So even for Shakespeare, this, how dare you be so excellent with your words and not have come through the proper conduits that are allowed, that are custodians of language. And hip-hop Shakespeare's been a really interesting experience for us in people's perception of the word, people's perception of who speaks and for whom and in what ways. And what I mean by that is the accent that we've come to believe is the proper British accent. Received pronunciation like this. The Queen's English, I believe we've come to know it as. That wasn't invented until 150 years after Shakespeare died, over 150 years. I'm going to repeat that. That way of speaking was not even invented when the greatest writer in England was alive. And Shakespeare is still hailed as, the godfather of English language. But no one thinks to explain that in Shakespeare's time, grammar was not formalized, so people played with grammar, played with the word. Spelling was not formalized, so people played with the way things were spelled. The dictionary was not formalized in the same way, so Shakespeare invented thousands of words. And this invention with language, when it happens now, is considered blasphemy against the English tongue. No, it's formalized now, that's it, it's done. You can't add or take any words away to or from the English language unless you come through these custodians of the language. But the greatest writer in England, I won't say in the world, but which some people do, which I think is a little immature. When we start getting into is Shakespeare better than Rumi, we're getting into a silly place. But this man who's hailed as the king of British words didn't obey hardly any of the rules that have now become so common and so formalized in British speech. And it's interesting to me the way young people have reacted all over the world when they get that information. They're like, oh, well, I'm like, hold on a minute. I'm not saying because rap's violent is a problem. Violence exists in the world. Art reflects that violence. It's how do we reflect that violence? And is there a rounded picture of this community coming across so we get a full spectrum of the word? Shakespeare's work, someone I always like to refer back to, incredibly violent. The play Titus Andronicus, one guy gets on another guy's nerves, he chops him to pieces, puts him in a pie and feeds him to his parents. Now, Biggie Smalls said that. Everyone would say Biggie Smalls is crazy. It's the one, coded language, the next one down. If Biggie Smalls does that, Biggie Smalls is crazy, he's a lunatic, he's a gangster rapper. Shakespeare does it, and he's one of the greatest writers in the English language. And this comes back to who is allowed to take possession of the word, you know. And our use of words defines our reality. Our inability to use those words will create for us a much smaller reality than we could have if we had a larger grasp of those words. I mean, it's why actually I look at periods of history. If we take someone like Toussaint Louverture, who was a man who led the revolution in Haiti, which was the only fully successful slave revolution or enslaved revolution in transatlantic slavery. They beat the armies of the British, Spanish, and Napoleon Bonaparte at their peak. Right? On the island of Haiti, Haiti in 1804 was declared the first independent African republic in the West, or black republic in the Western world. Who was Toussaint Louverture? What made him, of all the people who'd been enslaved, be the leader, or that period the leader? He was one of the few who was permitted to read. Very simple fact, it would seem, you know. But why were people who are enslaved, and why are people today of particular classes still encouraged to stay away from education? Because education is dangerous. Education makes you get ideas beyond your station. Being brilliant with the words makes you think bigger than the little estate or township or concrete set of blocks, or even if you're born into a well-to-do, so to speak, family. You know, an opening up of the language, I think, opens up your humanity. To me, poetry, as wording, is essentially music. You know, it's music. What poets do is create music with words. You know, what Jimmy does with the guitar is what a poet is trying to do with their words. And I think for all those reasons, there's something beyond the words that we use, and beyond these symbols that are just words, and there's a metaphor beyond them that we're all trying to reach and all trying to understand. And that's why the poet, I suppose, in so many periods of history, the musician, in so many periods of history, has been viewed as a threat or as a problem by those that seek power. You know, many times, in fact, prior to the last 150 years, a lot of music, or the overwhelming majority of the music produced by humanity, was for spiritual purposes. It was either for the church, you know, or for the mosque, or, you know, in Hindu or Sikh music, or in African spiritual music. The griot was as much, you know, a priest, as much a spiritual guardian as he was custodian of history, as much as he was custodian of entertainment. You know, these things were all interwoven. The artist, the wordsmith as spiritual guide, you know, the wordsmith as intellectual guide. And I think in the hip-hop at its best, I think uses words in this way. Hip-hop at its best reflects these traditions. And I'm about to play you a poem, one of my favourite poems from one of my favourite people that I think exemplifies this spiritual guide with words more than perhaps anybody else ever produced by hip-hop poetry, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. I think this is a gentleman that a couple hundred years from now will go down in that same way with your Shakespeares, with your Chaucers, with your Rumis, you know, with your Wally Sonyakas, whoever else you could care to name. I genuinely think this gentleman is that good, and if you read any one of his books, the Dead MC Scrolls, She, or Set the Shotgun to the Head, I'm convinced that you'll come to the same conclusions. It's a gentleman named Saul Williams, for those who don't know. I'm going to press play. No, it doesn't look like his friend. Just sit back down. Yes, right. No, but look, it's only up to, what I don't want it to do is get to that point of grade, and then it's like, it ruins it. So I'll sit back down.
This is actually one of my favorites too, actually.
Yes, it's incredible. It's incredible. Has anyone in here seen Saul live, by the way, except for Brother Hyde Gunn here? You haven't seen him live? Cameron and Elliot have. I was there when you did this, so that doesn't count. For those who don't know, I mean, I did a show with Saul at the British Library, actually. And this is what I mean about the power of words. It's funny because in the UK, there are many hip-hop artists that are on the radio, you know, more than I am, that are on TV more than I am. But then when the British Library does and I don't mean this to sound arrogant, I'm just being honest, you know, when the British Library does a festival about the celebration of the English language, they don't ask the artists that are promoted commercially because they recognise that that's perhaps not the most excellent representation of language. Who do they bring? They bring Saul Williams from the States, they bring me, they bring another young political artist called Loki, and these are the people that it was the launching of the Evolving English's language. It was the first really worldwide festival of English language at the British Library. And we did a show as part of that, actually a conference. Saul just performed one poem. We did a Q&A, and it was interesting because he was one of these people, you know when you really look up to someone, and you think, I don't really want to meet this person, you know, because I've met a few people that I've really looked up and thought, called him Bennett, you're an idiot, you know, and it takes the gloss off how you feel about that person. Saul was the complete opposite. You know, he was just there with his daughter, and it was everything you expected from his poetry was what you got in person. It felt that the words, again, coming back to the words as spiritual guide, the words were every bit as genuine, you know, as they seemed on record. And even if we look, you know, at the way words are used still today. Has anyone read George Orwell's 1984 in the house? Okay. Brilliant. For those who have read it, for those who haven't, I strongly recommend it. It's one of my favourite novels ever written. I think it tells us more about the times we live in than perhaps any other book ever written, or at least as much as any book can in a fictional sense. What's interesting about this book is one of the key concepts in the book is the idea of limiting language to limiting people's thinking. Those of you who read the book will know exactly what I mean. This idea, that it's called double speak. And my last album was actually called Double Think, inspired by George Orwell's 1984. For those that know, double think means to, let me see if I can remember the exact definition. The definition is to tell deliberate lies while believing them to be true, and to forget any fact the moment it becomes inconvenient. That is the basic gist of what doublethink is. And if that doesn't tell us a lot about the political state of the world today, I don't know what does. And this concept that Orwell came up with was that by slowly eroding, the parameters of speech, by slowly eroding, all the different words to express that something is good, good, excellent, wonderful, terrific. Taking them all down, and one of the concepts was it would be, right, double plus good, or triple plus good. There was no other adjective anymore for describing how good something was. And by doing this, it really imprisoned the thinking of the people in the novel and took down what they questioned. And some people think that sounds ludicrous and comedic, but when I read in the UK even, papers like The Sun, and the News of the World, I feel like that's exactly what's being done, It's barely English, and it's the most consumed paper in my country, And I read it and I think that that's very sad. That a whole section of a developed, educated society are being encouraged or participating in or choosing to have their language, their vocabulary, their worldview limited by something that's really a comic. It's not really news, it's not intellectual, it's not serious. And people don't really take it seriously, but then some people do. They'll quote you The Sun as an opinion form, and I'm like, oh, come on. The headlines, it's more should be treated as comedy, but it isn't. And I see how hip-hop is sort of buying into that same concept. Where I remember growing up and listening to Wu-Tang and not even knowing what half the words meant. Exaggerated authorization, Food and Drug Administration, testing poison in prison populations. My occupation is to stop the inauguration of Satan, blah, blah, blah. When I heard that verse on Impossible from the RZA, I didn't know what half the bloody words meant. I had to go to the dictionary for rap songs. Those of us who are 25 or older, or those of us who've gone back and done our research will know. Now, Wu-Tang Forever was the first rap album to go #1 in the UK. Think about that. It wasn't Puff Daddy, it wasn't Vanilla Ice, it wasn't any of the other materialistic, misogynistic, or gimmicky hip-hop. It was Wu-Tang Forever. That was the first rap record. I went to school, kids that listened to heavy metal, kids that went to punk, kids that went to grunge, kids that went to classical, everybody. That was the first record that united everyone. I wasn't old enough to experience Public Enemy in a school level. I had Public Enemy at home. But going into school, Wu-Tang Forever was the record that did it. More than Biggie, more than Tupac, more than anybody. Why? What was it Wu-Tang were doing with words that really no one else up to that point had been doing? There's certain periods in hip-hop, or certain MCs in hip-hop that I think are definitive turning points in the use of language in hip-hop music. Rakim is one, Nas is another. And I would say Wu-Tang belong on that same continuum where the language parameters of hip-hop were changed forever. And all of a sudden, you could have a rapper from the projects of Staten Island literally sounding as if he was Shakespeare. And in fact, I'm going to do a test with you to show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to read some quotes. The quotes are either from hip-hop or from Shakespeare. I've taken them either from my favourite rap songs or from some of my favourite Shakespearean plays. I'm going to read them out to you. You're going to raise your hand for either hip-hop or Shakespeare to tell me which you think is which. Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll do about 5. See how we feel. And hopefully the video is rendered. Beautiful. So my first quote is, maybe it's hatred I spew. Maybe it's food for the spirit. Maybe it's hatred I spew, maybe it's food for the spirit. Don't tell me if you know what it is, I just want to know. If you think that's Shakespeare, raise your hand, please. If you think that's hip-hop, raise your hand, please. By the way, there is no sitting on the fence. Everybody must raise their hand. Okay, so about 50-50. Cameron and Elliot, you can't raise your hands, please. You're not involved in this. Don't look at them two. You're not to raise your hand for any of the questions. You've seen this far too many times. Anyone heard of Eminem? Eminem is not Shakespeare. But that quote is an Eminem quote. It's from a track he did with Jay-Z called Renegade. You probably all know the song. Maybe it's hatred I spew. Maybe it's food for the spirit. Maybe it's beautiful music I made for you to just cherish, but I'm debating this. But once you take it out of context, you take away the perception, you take away the video, and you just look at the raw language, you're like, oh, rappers are intelligent. Hey, presto. I never knew that. Let's go for a couple more. Let's go for the most benevolent king communicates through your dreams. The most benevolent king communicates through your dreams. If you think that's Shakespeare, raise your hand, please. Okay. Hip-hop, raise your hand, please. Probably about 60-40 to Shakespeare there. Anyone heard of the RZA? The RZA is a member of the Wu-Tang Clan, who I was just speaking of. This is my point, is that Wu-Tang took it to a level where you could use words like benevolent, and no one was going to question it. Rappers, that was, for me, it was like, that's where they took it. They took it to that archaic, medieval, English, poetic language, coming from where they were coming from. And influenced by all of the philosophical, cultural doctrines of, you know, the civil rights movement, the black power struggle, etc. So they had all these fusions of different influences of words. You know, words like cipher. We use the word cipher every day, those of us in hip-hop culture. We don't even think about what it means. Does anyone know what the word cipher means? Before I get on to the next couple quotes. Did you put your hand up to what the word cipher means?
It means like type of hip-hop to rap.
Sort of, but what does it mean? What does the word cipher actually mean? What is a cipher? Yeah, exactly, it's a circle. It's the concept of zero. It's an Arabic word because it's a concept that more was brought to Southern Europe along with the rest of the numbers that we count with every day that we're not usually led to understand the sources. Many of the words, guitar, lemon, coffee, these are all concepts and words of algebra that are Arabic, they were brought into southern Spain by the Moors. But this influence on hip-hop means that we will use this concept. We didn't just say circle. We don't call a cipher, for those who don't know, a cipher is when MCs stand in a circle and rap. Now we could have just used circle. Why did we pick the word cipher? Because of this influence of this Moorish, Islamic, but also, you know, historical inflections on hip-hop culture. It makes us use words like cipher, or dropping knowledge, kicking science. We could just say rapping, you know? But we use all these intellectual words that coming from anyone else would be considered quite geeky. But coming from rappers is really, it make knowledge cool. That's what hip-hop did for me. I got to an age where I was like, it's actually sexy to be intelligent. Because these people who I look up to so much, who come from some of the most negative environments on planet Earth, are expressing themselves in this way that is just incredible. It made reading books just seem like the most beautiful thing you could ever do. Kind of the way hip-hop sold Gucci to the world today. You know, 15 years ago when I was a kid, it was selling me education. I went and researched tons of things because of rap records, and I know loads of people who did that. Last couple of quotes before we play the Sir Williams piece. We go for, I was not born under a rhyming planet. I was not born under a rhyming planet. Shakespeare? Hip-hop? Okay, so 60-40 to Shakespeare. And it is Shakespeare. It's for Much Ado About Nothing. We go for, don't feel bad by the way, I've done this exercise with everybody from Sir Ian McKellen to the head of education at the Globe, and no one as yet has got them all right. So don't feel like it's a reflection of you guys. In fact, I promise people, if the day a group gets them all right, I'll cut my afro off. As you can see, the afro is still fully intact, so clearly no one's got them all right as yet, because we've got like 40-50 quotes. The funny, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. An individual may get 2 or 3 right, but when we do a group exercise, as you've seen, 10 or 15 quotes, a whole group's never going to get them right. My point is, an individual will get a couple right. If we go on, eventually you're going to make mistakes because it just isn't obvious. And it's funny because when I've gone all over the world and I said to young people, right, what's the difference between the language Shakespeare uses and the language rappers use? Depending on what era of hip-hop they grew up in, has really, or how much they know about hip-hop, has really determined the responses. People 24, 25 plus have generally said, well, rap's poetry. You know, the best rappers are poets. Their language is excellent. It might not be that dissimilar. Whereas I've noticed, almost without exception, people under 21, so well, obviously it'll be clear what Shakespeare's more intelligent, blah, 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 blah. Or people who know nothing about hip-hop take the same view. And it just shows that perception is more important than reality sometimes. We'll go for a couple more, some of which some of you may know, some of you may not. Let's go for, my skeleton swims in eternal fire. My skeleton swims in eternal fire. Shakespeare. Hip-hop. Okay, overwhelmingly hip-hop on that one. And you're lucky it is hip-hop. It's Nas, it's from a track entitled You're the Man. If we go for a dead bird flying through a broken sky. A dead bird flying through a broken sky. Don't metaphor, right? A dead bird. What do people think that means before we even get into who said it or not? What does that mean to people? A dead bird flying through a broken sky? Except for you, Kim. You can tell me what it means to you. You just can't tell me which one you think it is. What does that mean to you?
Metaphorical.
Yeah, it's very metaphorical. Absolutely.
Freedom gone? Freedom lost?
Freedom lost, it could be. Could be. Absolutely.
I'm thinking a plane hit by a missile.
A plane hit by a missile?
Yeah.
Could be that. See the different interpretations we've got already. This is the beauty of poetry. Anyone else? What does that mean to you? A dead bird flying through a broken sky. Pardon?
Too much weed.
Too much weed? Too much weed. Yeah. So, who said it? Was it Shakespeare? Dead bird flying through a broken sky. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's coming up, the Shakespeares. Raise your hand nice and high if you think that was Shakespeare. So there's no confusion. Hip hop. Okay, overwhelmingly hip hop. That's from the same song. Nas, You're the Man. And the funny thing about these hip hop quotes, the funny thing about these hip hop quotes is that I never had to go searching for clever rap quotes, you know. Like, it's funny because when we first started the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company, I just picked like 20 random hip hop quotes that I knew in my head that I thought were clever. I didn't go and think, oh, where can I find some intelligent rap quotes? You know, half of them I've got from Triumph, from obvious Nas songs like You're the Man, and it's so weird because I thought I'd have to change them after a certain amount of time, that people would get used to it, and I haven't had to, you know. 4 or 5 years later, I'm still using the same quotes because it isn't obvious to people, even when I pick quotes from the most obvious rap songs of my era. We'll do 2 more and then I want to play this Williams piece, but if we go for who inflicted this bitter sickness? Who inflicted this bitter sickness? Shakespeare. Hip hop. 50-50. It's Inspector Deck for the Wu-Tang Clan, a song called A Better Tomorrow. Let's go for... Yeah, don't worry about it, it happens. Let's go for Heads by the Score Take Flight Inside of War. Heads by the Score Take Flight Inside of War. Shakespeare? Hip hop. Okay, 60-40 hip hop. Take flight inside a war, 6 hit the floor, die hard fast, demand more. Behold the bold soldier, control the globe slowly, so you know. That's not Shakespeare for the record. That's Wu-Tang again. I mean, I could do this with Wu-Tang all day long, to be honest. It's not even fair. Like, of all the entities in hip-hop, their material was so poetic that it would just become silly. I could just pick Wu-Tang quote after Wu-Tang quote after Wu-Tang quote. And I feel like why... Go ahead, Mom.
I was going to say, just to add, it also shows how timeless it is.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
It can exist in any decade, any period of time, just the language itself.
Of course. I mean, I went to see Wu-Tang perform at the Forum. I've got to be honest, I mean, I love the Wu more than I love probably any other entity in hip-hop. But I have to be honest, their live show is not so good. You know, they haven't really taken the concert where they should have. They haven't got even a band yet. I don't mean to be critical of hip-hop legends, but they haven't. Yet still they can sell 3,000-4,000 tickets in London, having not had a record on the radio in 15 years. And they sold it 2 nights out, 2 nights in the row at a place called the Forum, without even having the whole group there. Then they did one of the main stages at Glastonbury. What does this tell you? You know, this myth that, you know, conscious rap doesn't sell, intelligent rappers can't sell records, you know. It's just a myth that people want to tell you as an excuse to not support a particular narrative coming from a particular place in society. Because I went to see Public Enemy also, just before I left, a week before I left. Again, another group that haven't had a hit record in maybe 20 years. Again, they sold 3,000 live tickets. Packed, jam. How is it people that haven't had a record on the radio in 20 years can sell 3,000 live tickets? I know rappers that had number ones 2 years ago that can't sell 3,000 live tickets in their own country. Think about it. Yet Public Enemy can come to London, can go to Berlin, can go to Australia, and it's not like it's one dynamic buying their records. It's not like it's one dynamic supporting them. The very same dynamic that we're told are the record buying, you know, public, educated, middle class, people with disposable income. That's the people who's paying £30 to go and see Public Enemy. So it's very interesting the way we're told that it can't sell, it won't sell. That's why we don't play it on MTV anymore, you know, which I just think is a complete cop-out person. I think it's the power, coming back to what we're saying, the power of the word, the power of what Public Enemy was saying. You can't have middle-class, white English kids from Oxford forming an understanding with kids from the projects of New York. Because then how are you going to divide people? I mean, it's going to be very difficult. If your business, if your society is based on particular stratas, if you've got a music form and a set of words that can unite and enlighten different groups of people to different groups of people's plight, people that are told they're so radically different and they've got so much, different about one another and so little in common, you can't have a Chuck D, you can't have a Bob Marley, you can't have a Tupac, because then it becomes problematic. Because then we have too many groups of people coming together, we have too many groups of people recognizing a common humanity and a common narrative. Whereas I think the opposite happens when a particular stereotype is promoted within hip-hop. It reinforces those boundaries. It reinforces for people, yeah, I'm very different from those people. I've got no understanding of what's going on in the ghettos of New York or what's going on with black youth generally. Even for older black people. My grandmother looks at rap records and is like, I don't know who these crazy people are. But if I play a Wu-Tang record, if I play a Dear Mama from Tupac, she'll understand it, right? If I play a Gil Scott-Heron, she'll understand it, right? So it's what kind of hip-hop. If you play hip-hop that's going to alienate even me, and I love hip-hop, then what's it going to do to people who know nothing about hip-hop? And that's what it's achieving. This is the power of the words. We're going to hear from someone who I think is one of hip-hop's finest poets, and then we're going to open it up to talk a little bit. 1 second. I picked this one because it's all about the word, really. That's what Saul's talking about. It's about power of language. Please note in your head any lines that really stick out for you. I'm going to talk about some of the lines that are most important for me afterwards and why.
Our next guest is a very, very, very special person, a very close friend of mine, a very dear poet to all of us, and it's a pleasure to have him here. It's definitely a pleasure to bring him on to all of you. Without any further shenanigans, please give it up for Saul Williams.
Sorry. Technical issues, but the volume's right, so I don't know. There's a stereo volume.
Whereas break beats have been the missing link connecting the diasporic community to its drum-woven past. Whereas the quantized drum has allowed the whirling mathematicians to calculate the ever-changing distance between rock and stardom, we do hereby the their reality unkept by the changing standards of dialogue. Statements such as keep it real, especially when punctuating or anticipating modes of ultra-violence inflicted psychologically or physically, will henceforth be seen as retroactive and not representative of the individually determined is. Motherfuckers better realize, now is the time to self-actualize. Studies show that when the given norm is changed into face of the unchanging, the remaining contradictions will parallel the truth. Equate rhyme with reason, sun with season, reject mediocrity. Your current frequencies of understanding outweigh that has been given for you to understand. The current standard is the equivalent of an adolescent sickness to the diet of an infant. The rapidly changing body would acquire dysfunction and formative symptoms that could not properly mature on a diet of applesauce and crushed pears. Light years are interchangeable with years of living in darkness. The role of darkness is not to be seen as or equated with ignorance, with the unknown and the mysteries of the unseen. Thus, in the name of Robeson, Godson, Hurston, Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, Blackfoot, Helen, Ennin, Hollow, Kali, the three Marias, Tara, Lilith, Lord, Whitman, Baldwin, Ginsburg, Kaufman, Amumba, Gandhi, Gibran, Shabazz, Siddhartha, Medusa, Guevara, Guggenheim, Rand, Wright, Banneker, Tubman, Hamer, Holiday, James, Coltrane, Morrison, Joplin, Du Bois, Clark, Shakespeare, Michael, Ellington, Carter, Gay, Hathaway, Hendricks, Cootie, Dickinson, Ripperton, Mary, Isis, Teresa, Hansberry, Hessler, Plath, Rumi, Bellini, Michaud, Nostradamus, Nefertiti, Laurent, Shiva, Ganesha, Yamaya, Oshun, Obatala, Ogun, Kennedy, King, Four Little Girls, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Keller, Biko, Perone, Marley, Magdalene, Cosby, Shakur, those who burn, those still aflame, and the countless unnamed. We claim the present as the precinct, as the hereafter. We are unraveling our nables so that we may ingest the sun. We are not afraid of the darkness. We trust that the moon shall guide us. We are determining the future at this very moment. We know that the heart is the philosopher's stone. Our music is our alchemy. We stand as a manifested equivalent to 3 buckets of water and a handful of minerals, thus realizing that those very abundant bottom turned upside down, supply the percussive factor of forever. Let your children name themselves and claim themselves as the new day, the today. We are determined to be the channelers of these changing frequencies into songs, paintings, writings, dance, drama, photography, carpentry, crafts, love, and love. We enlist every instrument, acoustic, electronic, every so-called gender, race, sexual preference, every person as beings of sound to acknowledge their responsibility to uplift the consciousness of the entire fucking world. Any utterance unaimed will be disclaimed, will be maimed, 2 rappers slain.
I'll give you guys a minute to recover from that.
Real.
No, but you can see what I mean, why I say this guy. For me, he's light years ahead of everybody. He's over there doing something that belongs to any time, anywhere. I mean, literally, the same conversation that you put a Shakespeare or a Rumi or the Egyptian Book of the Dead in, that's the conversation for me that Saul belongs in. He doesn't belong in a conversation with the rest of us mere mortals. What was you going to say, bro? Sorry.
You didn't know his name.
Saul Williams, S-A-U-L, Saul.
No, I mean, now I do. But
Oh. Well, you can see why that he's... Sorry, go on.
My favorite line is, we're not afraid of the dark because the moon will guide us. Say that.
Yeah.
That one is sweet.
Go ahead, please.
Couple things so you guys just know. Saul Williams is the equivalent in the spoken word movement to Run DMC. And what I mean by that is, Saul Williams came up in a place called the New York Poetry Cafe. And at the time in the early 90s, spoken word was something that was a lot more insular, isolated type of style of poetry. It wasn't something, slam wasn't something that was very popular. Saul Williams was the head actor in a movie called Slam.
Yeah.
And he was also on New Eurekan's championship winning team. I think it was like 94, 95. He is the individual that kind of like opened up spoken word to the mainstreams in the United States. And he still to this day, somewhat almost like 20 years later, is like at the very top of that pyramid. I mean, he's so good, he doesn't slam anymore. Like he's won so much.
Yeah, it's pointless. It's a waste of everyone else's time.
But he's kind of regarded as, he's not the godfather or the pioneer of spoken word. He's just the individual that like brought it like to the stage that we see it now. My favorite line, and the one I do with my students is, I just love the list. I just love
It's crazy, the names he's
of
using.
all of those names. Not only because all of those names are iconic and great, and situations, Hiroshima, 4 Little Girls. If you know 4 Little Girls refers to the civil rights movement. 4 young girls were in a church, and the church was firebombed by the Ku Klux Klan. It's one of the seminal moments in the civil rights movement. It was one of the moments in which
The 4 girls died, by the way.
yes, it's 4 girls in Birmingham, Alabama. But for me, that list is so amazing because one, it spans race, it spans time, it spans religion, and it shows how half that list is individuals that have a mastery of language in different forms. You heard Billie Holiday, music, Shakespeare. You heard different religious gods, Ogun, Oshun, Yemeya, and all of these individuals are connected in some way to language. So he's kind of created this new continuum of the tradition, right? So before you have the canon, the English canon, but then there's also like an African canon or an Asian canon. He kind of like breaks all of those, like, no, these individuals have a mastery.
And they transcend all of them.
Right.
Nonsense.
And they're all interconnected when you kind of do the research. So it's like really, I love that line when our kids, but I literally make them like, okay, who's that? Go research this person. Like I don't give them all of them, there's too many to do. But I said, the ones you don't know, because they almost know some of them. But the ones you don't know, I want you to just go research, just find out just a little bit about them, just to see, what their greatness is. And I love that. Those kids we have every time I hear it.
You know, it's crazy. My favorite part is, well, not my favorite part, the part that always stuck out for me on this particular listen was reject mediocrity. Your current frequencies of understanding outweigh that which has been given for you to understand. The current standard is the equivalent of an adolescent restricted to the diet of an infant. The rapidly changing body would acquire dysfunctional formative symptoms and could not properly mature on a diet of applesauce and crushed pears. Do you see what I mean? It's like what we're being fed, the words we're being fed every day that we're conditioned to accept. It's that 1984 concept. The restriction of our consciousness is having us pledge allegiance to or belief to things that have very little to do with human consciousness, potential, spirituality, have everything to do with keeping us divided and controlled and subservient, and not from achieving our full potential as individuals. To me, someone like Saul is an example of that achievement, but it's very interesting because despite his popularity, he's not promoted in that way, you know. Despite his cult status, despite his huge fan base, half the kids I talk to claim to love hip-hop and never heard of him. It's not their fault, he's just not promoted in that way. Why? I mean, I would put it to you that I took one of Saul's poems, he's got a poem called Pedagogue of Young Gods, which is another one of my favourite pieces of his. I've taken that into prison in the UK several times, and I played it to, you know, young people that are supposed to be, you know, the worst young people in Britain. And most of the time I get at least one set of tears from a Saul Williams poem. Because of what he's saying. What he's saying speaks particularly to a self-hate, you know, that comes out of being in the hood. And so many people who've never even heard that kind of narrative before just break down. You know, they might be used to listening to a Jay-Z or a DMX or whatever else. But Saul touches something in them and opens up something that can be potentially, I suppose, dangerous within humanity, the spiritual power of that word, you know. And so Saul's definitely someone who I think you should all go buy his albums, buy his books and study. Go ahead, please, bro.
Yeah, I was going to say, the part that stood out for me, first time this poem I read it from the DMC scroll.
Okay.
And the beginning part, when you read it, it's so unrhythmic, and yet he is talking about rhythms.
Yeah.
You know, that stood out for me, where the beginning part is too many words, it's difficult, you know, to get through, and yet he's talking about having rhythm. He's talking about rhythm when he starts the poem. What does it say? Okay, it's now away from my mind. But that part, I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's irony. So it just stood out for me at that point. And, you know.
Absolutely. What stood out for everyone else in that?
Sorry, I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
You said, you quoted a line, and then you said it shows the spiritual power of the word. What does that mean?
Oh, I think I was talking about the poem in general, not the particular line that I quoted, but what I think Saul was saying in that whole section that I just read out or said. Reject mediocrity. Your current standard is the equivalent of an adolescent, a young person, restricted to the diet of an infant. The rapidly changing body will acquire dysfunctional symptoms and could not properly mature on a diet of applesauce and crushed pears. What I take that to mean is Saul saying that the applesauce and crushed pears is this mediocre, unintelligent, despiritualized entertainment that we're all being pushed and peddled and encouraged to think is so cool and so great and so wonderful. And if you like anything more intelligent, you're a bit of a square or a nerd or, you know, a backpacker or conscious. And I take what Saul is saying in that place to be reject all of it. That's like what he says at the end about any utterance unaimed will be disclaimed. You know, any utterance that is not encouraging humans to attain a higher level of consciousness, it will be disclaimed. We're not counting that. We're not even interested in that. You know, we're going to assassinate that. That's nothing to do with nothing. Don't worry about the fame and all that. You know, worry about eternity. Worry about 2,000 years from now, people looking back on what you were saying and realizing that you were part of a movement towards human beings having some goddamn sense. Pardon my use of the words. Don't want to offend anyone, but it's like, I mean, look around the world. You know, people talk about conspiracy theories. There's no need for conspiracy. We're a bunch of idiots. We don't need conspiracy. Look at what we're doing to each other everywhere on this planet. And what Saul is saying is, come beyond that, you know. And the very list that he's given, he hasn't given a list full of people that look like him. You know, he hasn't given a list from people that just come from the ghettos of America like he does, you know. He's given a list of icons from every culture, from every walk of life, from every time, saying, yeah, I might be a young black male from the hood of America. That doesn't mean I can't span beyond that with my words, with my thought process, with my mentality, and take possession of everything. Take influence from everything. And this is what I think is most important and what can be most limiting in the way hip-hop is used nowadays, where we've almost bought, you know, all around the world I go, young people generally, but young black people specifically, we almost bought an identity fed to us. But by whom? You know, Leo Cohen, you know, and Jimmy Iovine, and the rest of the people that own hip-hop music, they're not young, they're not black. Yeah, Lyle Cohen, you know, they're not from the hood. You know, but these are the people who own hip-hop. So whose definition of self are we taking in? Why don't they promote Saul? You know, so it's for me very important that we understand there's not one way to be a human being. Whatever skin, whatever class, whatever gender that shell may be, There's a billion ways to be that, and I think what the best art does, hopefully, you know, is open us up to that, you know. I remember being 18, 19 years old, and a lot of the stereotypes I speak of now in my music, I was that guy. That's why I don't judge nobody, you know, because when I was 18 or 19, if you listen to my early stuff, you'd be like, that ain't the same guy. It's a different person. But life experience, knowledge, traveling, and listening to people like Saul literally changed my life, changed my mentality, changed my entire outlook.
I was going to say that, sorry.
No, please.
One of the parts that I liked the most was that one, darkness is not ignorance, it is the unknown,
Yeah.
the mystery, and very, very beautiful. And in those few lines, so succinctly expressing the rejection of an Orientalist or othering view of dark Africa, the dark continent, you know, and showing that that's just something you don't maybe understand without exoticizing it. So that was beautiful. And I have a quick question, because I'm thrilled you raised Saul. The last time I saw him, he was going very experimental with his look.
Yeah.
Makeup, hair, crazy. What was he doing with that? What was that expression?
I don't know. I think it was just Saul. Maybe he's a big David Bowie fan. Huge David Bowie fan. And he lives in Paris now. I don't know. Maybe it's just part of that. But when I saw him, it was the same. It was one side of the hair shaved, a kind of. And I mean, I don't know. It's each their own, I suppose.
And he's been doing so with 9 Inch Nails as well.
Well, 9 Inch Nails produced. Trent Reznor produced 2 of his albums.
How is it?
So he produced all of The Inevitable Rise and Liberation of Niggy Stardust. And was it some of Saul Williams? Pardon? He didn't produce Amethyst Rockstar. Saul produced that. Yeah, Saul's a producer as well. He produced Amethyst Rockstar and the self-titled album. I think it's only the one album that Trent Reznor produced.
Yeah, I think it's the last one.
Yeah. Well, he's just had one recently, apparently, but I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, I mean,
I've heard some bad reviews, that's why I'm scared to listen to it. Because I just want to keep him where he is. I don't want to hear bad stuff.
Just a couple of answers to your point. I also think that Saul is he's actually not even from Europe. He actually was born and raised in Newport, New York, which is about 45 minutes out. I also think that part of that, looking at style, is also he's very in tune to indigenous cultures. And I think some of that also is a reflection of that. One other quick thing about the list, the list to me is crazy too, but also kind of like the hip hop and Saul. Actually, by him putting that list in his poem, indirectly, he's actually put himself also in that list. So it was also kind of bragging as well. So it's like, so here's all these icons who's in the list in my poem. So by right, he's actually put himself on that list too.
Oh, absolutely.
Just as an aside, which is what's dope about how he does what he does, because it's bragging without bragging. Like he doesn't have to be like, I'm nice. The words make him nice. And then he puts him on the list like, you're already thinking like, oh, why is your name on that list? Like that's what it does for you. Like that's what's ill about song. The stuff that's even unsaid that you get. Yeah, exactly. No, that's why I was yeah.
Absolutely. We've got time for 1 or 2 more and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, well, mainly just to understand what you said earlier. You were talking about words and how, like, particularly what you was when you were talking about the tone that people speak in. I found it very interesting in the sense that we, well, personally speaking, coming from a colonial point of view, when we speak English, we have to speak it in the right tone. Like
I'm going to touch on that actually. Go on, continue.
Sounds like you have to sound a certain way to be accepted, so to speak. But if you speak it in thick African accent, you kind of view it as stupid.
Naturally, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, stupid by particular people.
Yeah, by particular people. And I just found it interesting in the sense that you said that, in hip hop, MCs are now using like big words, so to speak, and but still they're not really being accepted because they're not really being promoted by those that actually control it, because they're like kind of putting us in a box. Do you think that it's like language, words are a weapon?
Yeah, absolutely, which is exactly why those MCs are not being accepted and promoted. And it exactly comes back to what I was saying about the politics of class and race. If I were to disrespect my mother's side of my heritage in the way that's become normal and acceptable for me to disrespect the father's side of my heritage, we can all accept I wouldn't have a career. In fact, I'd probably get arrested. And so I think that's exactly why. But I also think that who cares if they're not being accepted, to be frank. The very assumptions of a lot of Western intelligentsia, is that Africans are stupid. We have to be honest about that. If there's still people in the 21st century stupid enough to believe that and to want to project that, who cares? You know, the history of the continent is still there for all to see. Great Zimbabwe, the universities of Timbuktu, the 223 pyramids in Sudan, the libraries of the Songhai Empire, the Songbo Eredo, which is a moat that's 20 meters wide, 70 meters deep, dug around an area of 400 square miles in Nigeria 1,000 years ago. We can go on and on and on. A lot of us are kept deliberately ignorant of the facts of the continent. You know, even a lot of well-meaning, you know, people who have good intentions don't come on that, you know, level of equilibrium, knowing about Oshun, Obertala, Ogun, the religion of Ile Ife, the spiritual conceptions and cosmologies of the African universe. But to me, in the 21st century, I think we got to start having the attitude, if people want to believe that, who cares? That's their issue, it's their problem. What you were saying about tonality is tremendously interesting for Jamaican patois, because that's what Jamaican patois is. That's why Jamaican patois is characterized as the ultimate stupidity, the ultimate ghetto language, the ultimate badmanism, rather than, as Jamaican patois actually does, carrying the philosophical concepts, particularly of Rastafarianism, referring to oneself as the I, you know, or Babylon and all these other things, but it carries the tonalities and rhythmic inflections of the 20 West African linguistic groups that reside in Jamaica today. And so Jamaican speech, particularly where I come from, is constantly seen and viewed as the, like I said, the ultimate ghettoism, rather than being a representation of that particular group of people's strength to, under extremely strenuous circumstances, hold on to massive elements of their culture. That's why Jamaica's been, in many ways, in the English-speaking world, one of the leading lights in African Caribbean culture, not because Jamaicans are special or smart or any more important or any more rebellious, as they like to sometimes say, stupidly. No, the luck of history means that Jamaicans held on to some things that in some other places people were not able to hold on to. Haiti's another example, northeastern Brazil, where Yoruba religion is better preserved than it is in Nigeria, is another example. Or New Orleans, that gave birth to jazz, is another example. So I would say in the 21st century, it's about being like a soul and claiming all of that and not giving a rat's backside what anyone else wants to say or wants to think, or taking on anyone else's conceptions. And that goes for any race, gender, as he said, sexual preference, etc. Just being the best human being you can be. Last question, and then we got to go if there is one more. If there's not, then we'll wrap up. The power of the word. Okay, pleasure. Catch you guys later.